In the earliest years of the Cold War, global power was shaped less by open warfare and more by fear, secrecy, and imagination. The Second World War had ended, but peace was uneasy and unstable. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as rival superpowers, each convinced that the other was preparing for a surprise attack that could erase entire cities in minutes. In this atmosphere, intelligence was incomplete, trust was non-existent, and worst-case assumptions became the foundation of national security planning. It was within this climate that one Soviet aircraft, the Myasishchev M4, became far more dangerous in perception than it ever was in reality. To understand why the Myasishchev M4 terrified the Pentagon, it is necessary to understand how central bombers were to American military thinking in the 1950s. At the time, intercontinental ballistic missiles were still in their infancy. The primary means of delivering nuclear weapons across continents was the long-range bomber. Aircraft such as the B-36 Peacemaker, the B-47 Stratojet, and later the B-52 Stratofortress formed the backbone of America's deterrence strategy. These bombers were not just weapons. They were symbols of power, reach, and technological superiority. American planners believed that as long as these bombers could reach Soviet territory, the United States would retain strategic dominance. Any aircraft capable of intercepting or neutralizing them posed an existential threat. This is why reports of new Soviet jet aircraft were treated with extreme urgency. Every new silhouette on a radar screen was analyzed not just as a machine, but as a potential end to America's nuclear advantage. Across the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union was facing its own challenges. The country had suffered immense destruction during World War II, yet it was expected to compete technologically with a largely untouched United States. Under Joseph Stalin's leadership, Soviet engineers were placed under relentless pressure to produce results quickly. Among these engineers was Vladimir Myasishchev, a gifted but politically vulnerable aircraft designer tasked with building a long-range jet bomber capable of carrying nuclear weapons. The project that emerged from this pressure was the Myasishchev M4. From the outset, the aircraft was ambitious. It featured swept wings optimized for high-speed flight, for powerful turbojet engines, and a massive airframe designed to carry heavy payloads over long distances. When it first flew in 1953, the M4 represented a significant leap forward for Soviet aviation. Internally, it was promoted as proof that the Soviet Union could rival American aerospace engineering. Externally, however, the aircraft took on a life of its own. Western intelligence had very limited access to accurate information about Soviet weapons programs. Much of what the United States knew came from indirect sources: foreign observers, intercepted communications, radar tracking, and carefully staged Soviet demonstrations. This lack of transparency created fertile ground for exaggeration and fear. One of the most influential sources of misinformation came from Soviet air parades. During these public displays, M4 bombers would fly past observers in formations, then circle back and fly past again. To Western analysts, it appeared as though dozens of unique aircraft were taking part. In reality, the same few planes were being counted multiple times. This simple deception convinced many in Washington that the Soviet Union was mass-producing advanced bombers at an alarming rate. Even more alarming were early estimates of the M4's performance. Some intelligence reports suggested extraordinary capabilities, including extreme altitude and unprecedented speed. Over time, speculation hardened into belief. Whispers of an aircraft capable of speeds approaching 2,000 miles per hour began circulating within defense circles. While no evidence supported such claims, the absence of proof to the contrary allowed the myth to grow. If such an aircraft existed, the implications were catastrophic. A bomber or interceptor flying at that speed could tear through American defenses, intercept U.S. bombers before they reached their targets, and potentially strike with little or no warning. Escort fighters of the era would be rendered obsolete. Radar networks might detect the aircraft only moments before impact. For the Pentagon, this was not merely a technical problem, it was a strategic nightmare. In reality, the Myasishchev M4 was never designed as an interceptor. It was a strategic bomber, optimized for range and payload rather than speed and agility. Its actual top speed was far below the mythical figures imagined by Western analysts. The aircraft also suffered from serious limitations. Its engines consumed fuel at an alarming rate, reducing its effective range. Maintenance was complex, and operational reliability was inconsistent. None of these weaknesses were visible to outside observers at the time. Nevertheless, fear drove policy. The perceived threat of the M4 became a central pillar of what later became known as the bomber gap. American leaders became convinced that the Soviet Union possessed a larger and more capable bomber force than the United States. This belief influenced elections, defense budgets, and long-term military planning. Politicians warned of vulnerability, generals demanded new systems, and the defense industry responded with unprecedented speed. As a result, the United States embarked on a massive expansion of its air defense infrastructure. Radar early warning systems were pushed farther north, culminating in the construction of the distant early warning line across the Arctic. This network was designed to detect incoming aircraft hours before they could reach American cities, buying precious time for a response. At the same time, new interceptor aircraft were rushed into development. Fighters such as the F-102 Delta Dagger and the F-106 Delta Dart were designed specifically to counter high-speed, high-altitude threats like the imagined M4 Interceptor. These aircraft prioritized speed, climb rate, and missile-based combat, reflecting the belief that future air battles would be decided in seconds rather than minutes. Surface-to-air missile systems also gained prominence. Programs such as Nike Ajax and Nike Hercules were deployed around major population centers and strategic installations. These missiles represented a fundamental shift in air defense philosophy, acknowledging that human pilots alone might not be able to react quickly enough to stop fast-moving threats. Ironically, while the United States was transforming its defenses, the Soviet Union was quietly moving on from the M4. The aircraft failed to meet expectations as a true intercontinental bomber. Its limited range meant it could not reliably reach targets in North America without aerial refueling, a capability the Soviets lacked at the time. As a result, the M4 never became the cornerstone of Soviet nuclear strategy. That role was instead filled by the Tupolev Tu-95. Powered by turboprop engines, the Tu-95 appeared outdated compared to sleek jet bombers, yet it offered exceptional range, efficiency, and reliability. Over time, it became one of the most enduring military aircraft in history. In comparison, the M4 was gradually reassigned to secondary roles, including maritime patrol and aerial refueling. The truth about the Myasishchev M4 began to emerge only after advances in reconnaissance technology. High-altitude U-2 spy planes provided the first clear glimpses into Soviet bomber bases. Later, reconnaissance satellites confirmed what some analysts had begun to suspect. The feared bomber fleets were far smaller than imagined, and their capabilities were far more limited. The mythical 2,000 miles per hour Interceptor never existed. The bomber gap was largely an illusion created by fear, secrecy, and misinterpretation. Yet by the time this realization took hold, the strategic landscape had already changed. The United States had built one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in history, driven largely by a threat that was never real. The legacy of the Myasishchev M4 is therefore not measured in combat victories or technological breakthroughs. Instead, it stands as a powerful symbol of Cold War psychology. It demonstrates how perception can outweigh reality, how secrecy can amplify fear, and how imagined threats can reshape global policy. In the end, the Myasishchev M4 scared the Pentagon more than it proved Soviet capability because it represented something far more dangerous than numbers or technical specifications. It represented the unknown. In the tense, paranoid atmosphere of the early Cold War, uncertainty was a weapon. It didn't matter whether the Soviets could actually strike American cities with a nuclear payload. What mattered was what the United States believed they could do. And the M4, with its massive wingspan, sleek fuselage, and the promise of intercontinental reach, made the unknown terrifyingly real. The aircraft never achieved the extreme speeds or altitudes initially feared, nor did it enter mass production in the quantities American intelligence had imagined. It never flew nonstop from Moscow to New York with a full payload. Yet in Washington, D.C., planners and strategists treated it as if it could. Every briefing, every classified report, every wargaming scenario had to account for a bomber that could, in theory, appear over U.S. skies without warning. For a brief but decisive moment, the M4 changed the calculus of national defense, forcing decades of spending on radar, interceptors, and early warning systems that might not have been necessary if reality had matched the myth. This fear of the unknown had profound consequences. The Pentagon accelerated the B-52 program, poured resources into long-range refueling capabilities, and expanded the U.S. Air Force's strategic bomber wings. Every intelligence estimate, no matter how speculative, was treated as actionable. Analysts debated wildly varying reports of the aircraft's speed, range, and payload. Some said it could carry 20 nuclear bombs halfway around the globe. Others warned that even a handful of sorties could devastate entire regions. And because nobody could verify the facts, the U.S. treated every possibility as probable, every rumor as a threat. The M4's psychological impact extended beyond military planning. It shaped diplomatic negotiations, influenced arms control discussions, and even contributed to the nuclear deterrent doctrine. The aircraft became a symbol, a ghost in the intelligence reports that haunted Pentagon officials. It was proof that sometimes perception alone could alter strategy, policy, and the course of history. For the Soviet Union, the M4 was a partially successful experiment. For the United States, it was a nightmare scenario. It reminded everyone that in the nuclear age, the most dangerous weapon was often not the one that existed, but the one imagined. And so, for a brief but unforgettable moment, an aircraft that never reached 2,000 miles per hour changed the world. Not through its engines, its weapons, or its design, but through the fear it inspired. Because during the Cold War, the unknown was the most potent weapon of all.